I was fixing the fence line when it happened. A deafening roar tore through the sky, followed by a sickening crunch that rattled the earth beneath my boots. I dropped my tools and ran toward the plume of smoke rising from the west field. And there it was, a small aircraft crumpled and smoking, right in the middle of my property. Before I could even check if the pilot was alive, I heard the screech of a golf cart, and there she was, Karen Grayson, HOA president. Purse swinging, phone out, and attitude turned up to 11. I knew it. You've been violating HOA regulations, and now you're running some kind of airstrip. I'm calling the cops and the FAA. Karen, I growled. A man might be injured. Go home. Too late. She was already on the phone, rattling off lies and trespassing onto my land like she owned it. When the cops showed up, she smirked. But then came the unmarked SUV. Turns out, interfering at a federal crash site carries serious consequences. Karen came to report me, and left with a federal fine, and that was just her first mistake. It was one of those mornings where everything just felt right. The breeze was soft, the horses were calm, and the sun was just high enough to warm the dew off the grass. Jake stood by the barn, sipping coffee from a chipped enamel mug, watching the world stretch quietly across his 80-acre ranch. The hum of crickets and the occasional chirp of a hawk overhead was about as much noise as he ever got this far from town. But that peaceful rhythm shattered literally in a matter of seconds. A strange sound tore through the calm, a sputtering engine, low and ragged, followed by the unmistakable roar of a prop plane flying dangerously low. Jake spun around, his eyes scanning the horizon, just in time to see a silver flash streak across the tree line. Its nose dipped too far forward. Oh no, the plane pitched down hard, clipped a fence post, and slammed into the western field. With a gut-wrenching crunch, dirt, debris, and birds exploded into the air. Smoke started curling up before the wreckage even settled. Jake's mug hit the dirt as he bolted toward the crash. His boots pounded the pasture as he ran, already pulling out his phone to dial 911. The smell of fuel hit his nose before he even reached the smoking aircraft. Miraculously, the wings were mostly intact, though the tail was bent nearly 90 degrees. One wheel had snapped off entirely and rolled several feet from the body. Inside the cockpit, slumped against the controls, was a man mid-40s, blood on his forehead, clearly dazed. "Sir, hey, can you hear me?" Jake banged the side of the glass, trying to get a response. The pilot moaned. That was enough. He was alive. Jake backed up and quickly relayed the situation to the dispatcher. "Yeah, I've got a down-sink plane on private property. West pasture, just beyond the livestock fence. Pilot's alive, but unconscious. Fuel's leaking. No fire yet, but it's close." The dispatcher told him to keep clear and wait for first responders. He nodded to himself and started backing up, when the last voice on earth he wanted to hear pierced the air. Oh my God. Jake turned slowly. Karen Grayson, the self-appointed dictator of the local HOA, and Jake's living nightmare since the day he bought the ranch 3 years ago. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near this part of the property, but there she was, standing at the fence line in her sket heels, and a damn clipboard, of course. "What the hell is going on here?" she demanded, her eyes wide as she whipped out her phone and began filming. "A plane crashed, Karen," Jake said, already irritated. "I've called it in. EMTs are on their way. Stay back." She gasped theatrically. "You're running an airstrip out here, aren't you?" "I knew it. I told the board you were up to something." Jake blinked. "Seriously? You think I planned this? You don't just have planes falling from the sky?" "Jake, that's a code violation. Probably federal. This is a residential area." "It's not. It's my ranch. Zoned agricultural. Private property. Now leave." Karen marched up to the fence, heels sinking into the dirt. "You can't talk to me like that. As HOA president, you have zero authority out here. This is outside the HOA boundary. That's been legally established several times, Jake snapped. You're trespassing. She ignored him and kept recording, now narrating like a news anchor. And as you can see, this man has set up an unauthorized airstrip. There is evidence of aviation activity, and I have reason to believe this is a threat to the neighborhood. Jake rolled his eyes. Karen, for the last time, before he could finish, she climbed over the fence. Karen, that's trespassing. I'm documenting a code violation, she huffed, stepping right toward the smoking wreck. And if you so much as touch me, that's assault. I'll sue. Lady, if that thing catches fire, you're going to wish I had stopped you. But Karen wasn't listening. She crept closer to the plane, holding her phone high like she was filming a wildlife documentary. Jake backed away toward the main road, needing to flag down first responders. As he turned, he heard the worst words imaginable. I'm calling the police. He turned back. You're seriously calling 911? What for? To report you, she shouted, already dialing. You're operating an unlicensed airfield, and you probably damaged community property. Jake threw his arms up. There is no community property here. This is my ranch. You're trespassing on federal airspace accident land now, Karen. But she was already talking to dispatch, spinning her web of HOA lies like she always did. Sirens began wailing in the distance. Jake shook his head, heart pounding, not from the crash, not from the risk of fire, but from the certainty that this situation was about to spiral into something way bigger than either of them could handle. And somehow, Karen had just made herself the center of it all. The first siren echoed off the trees before the dust even settled. Jake stood at the edge of his pasture, arms crossed, boots muddy, and heart still thudding from adrenaline. The ranch's western field now looked like the aftermath of a war zone, smoke drifting from the crumpled plain, the faint smell of leaking fuel, and Karen Grayson pacing nearby like she was the director of a disaster movie. A sheriff's cruiser pulled up, lights flashing. Behind it, a second car rolled in, then a third. 3 deputies stepped out, hands resting on their belts, eyes scanning the scene. Jake stepped forward. Thank God. Over here. Karen shoved past him before he could say another word. Officers, she shouted, waving her phone like it was a badge. I demand you arrest this man immediately. The sheriff, a tall, middle-aged man with the permanent look of someone who'd seen too much nonsense in his career, raised a brow. Ma'am, you want to back up and tell me what the hell is going on here? Karen pointed dramatically toward the wreckage. This man has turned his property into an unauthorized airport. A plane crashed. Here he's clearly been running flights, endangering this community. Jake let out a breath and took a step forward. Sheriff, my name's Jake Walker. I own this land. I called in the crash the moment it happened. That pilot had an emergency and came down right here. I've got no airstrip, no hangars, no aircraft, just a lot of pasture and one very lucky crash site. Karen scoffed. He's lying. He's hiding something. One of the deputies motioned a ward. Karen, ma'am, you need to calm down. Step back from the scene. Jake pulled a folded paper from his back pocket and handed it to the sheriff. Deed to the land. Zoned agricultural. Outside HOA boundaries. The sheriff skimmed it, then gave a slow nod. Yep, all checks out. Looks like he's doing everything right. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. That's impossible. I personally filed a complaint last year, which we tossed out, because it was groundless, the sheriff muttered, and then, things got real. A deep hum approached from the road, low and smooth. A black SUV, government plates, tinted windows, rolled slowly toward them. Another followed, then a third. Jake's eyes narrowed. That doesn't look local. The sheriff stepped aside as the vehicle stopped. 4 men and 2 women emerged, wearing dark navy jackets with FAA in bold yellow letters across their backs. One carried a large camera rig. Another held a metal clipboard. Their leader, a sharp-eyed woman in aviator sunglasses, didn't waste time. Everyone stepped back. This is now a federally controlled site. FAA crash investigation protocol is in effect, she said, voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The sheriff raised both hands. We've secured the perimeter. No fire. One Pontius Pilot. Ambulance is en route. The FAA agent nodded and began barking orders to her team. Yellow tape went up around the wreckage. Camera drones lifted off to scan the site from above. Equipment cases opened on the hood of the SUV. Jake took a respectful few steps back. Karen, of course, did not. She kept filming. Excuse me? She said, striding forward like she owned the whole operation. I need to speak with whoever is in charge. The lead agent barely looked at her. Ma'am, this is a restricted area. Please, step back. Karen rolled her eyes. You don't understand. I'm the HOA president. This man has a history of rule violations. I have documentation. Ma'am, the agent repeated, firmer this time, you are not authorized to be here. Jake watched, amazed, as Karen actually stepped over the newly placed FAA tape and walked toward the tail of the plane still recording. The agent sighed and gave a nod. Two federal agents flanked Karen within seconds. Ma'am, you're interfering with a federal investigation. Karen blinked. I'm exercising my right to document a public safety hazard. You're trespassing on a secured crash site, one agent replied flatly. You're under temporary federal detainment. Turn around. Karen's mouth dropped open. Wait, what? You can't arrest me. I'm the victim here. He's the criminal. They didn't care. One agent gently but firmly pulled her hands behind her back. No cuffs yet, just protocol detainment. Karen began flailing, demanding to speak to the governor, her lawyer, even someone's supervisor. Jake just stood still, part shocked, part amused, mostly just grateful that for once someone else saw exactly what he'd been dealing with. For years, the sheriff gave him a knowing glance. She'll give you this much trouble, all the time. Jake shrugged. Pretty much. I once got fined because my fence looked aggressive. Whatever that means. The agent leading the FAA team walked over. You, Jake Walker. That's me. You did the right thing. Thanks for calling it in and staying calm. Our team's gonna handle this from here. Pilot's lucky to have landed here. Could have been way worse. Appreciate that, Jake said. I just hope he makes it. She nodded. He's stable. Ambulance is a few minutes out. We'll take it from here. Karen, still loudly protesting her innocence, was being guided to the side of one SUV, where another agent was taking her statement and scanning her ID. Jake couldn't help but smirk. He didn't crash a plane. He didn't break the law. And, for once, someone finally put Karen in her place. But something told him this wasn't over yet. Karen Grayson sat in a collapsible field chair beside the black FAA SUV, arms crossed, mouth twisted in the deepest scowl she could physically manage. Her sunglasses were now lopsided, her heels caked in mud, and her pristine HOA clipboard had been confiscated and placed in an evidence bag. The queen bee of suburban overreach looked more like a soggy, shrieking tourist caught in the wrong national park. Jake stood about 20 feet away, watching the scene unfold while sipping his second cup of coffee, this one poured fresh from a thermos he'd brought. Just after the paramedics arrived, an FAA investigator stepped up to Karen with a tablet in hand. Ma'am, we reviewed the footage on your phone. You recorded yourself crossing into a federally restricted crash site. You also touched the aircraft, which is considered evidence in an ongoing federal investigation. Karen's jaw fell open. I was trying to document a violation. That man Jake Walker is running an unlicensed airstrip. That plane proves it. The agent blinked. Ma'am, the plane experienced a mechanical failure. The pilot made an emergency landing to avoid crashing into residential homes. Your neighbor's ranch was the safest open space in range. Of course it was, Jake muttered under his breath. Karen exploded. This is ridiculous. He's manipulating the situation. He planted that crash to make me look bad. Everyone turned to stare at her. Even the sheriff let out a small, stunned chuckle. The FAA lead agent Marquez calmly stepped forward. Let's be very clear. You ignored multiple orders too. Remain outside a federal perimeter. You trespassed. You interfered with federal responders. You touched crash evidence. Those are 3 separate violations. Karen leaped to her feet, hands flailing. I'm the president of the HOA. I have rights. I pay taxes. I run community safety. I, Marquez, cut her off. And none of that overrides federal jurisdiction. You're lucky we're issuing you a citation instead of pressing for formal charges. Citation, Karen shrieked. You're fining me. Agent Marquez tapped a few buttons on her tablet and held it up. $3.7 interference with a federal investigation. Violation of FAA safety perimeter. Trespassing on private property, connected to an active emergency. Karen turned a deep shade of red. I will sue all of you. This is a witch hunt. Jake stepped forward slowly, arms crossed, voice calm. Karen, maybe if you'd waited at the fence like a decent human being instead of filming a man bleeding in a plane wreck, you wouldn't be in this mess. Karen spun on him. You think this is funny? Your precious ranch is a ticking time bomb. You probably built that pasture just to skirt airspace laws. Jake blinked. Lady, the only thing I build here are fences and hay sheds. Another agent chimed in, flipping through a file. We checked. No evidence of aviation structures. No permits for aircraft use. Mr. Walker's land is cleared of any wrongdoing. The words hit Karen like a brick. Her righteous fury began to falter. No, you don't understand. I've filed complaints. With the HOA, with the zoning board. I have emails, hundreds of them, which have nothing to do with a federal air crash, Marquez replied, completely unfazed. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. The sheriff walked over, suppressing a grin. Look, ma'am, I've been dealing with you long enough to know this is just your Tuesday routine, but you finally stepped into a lane that's way above your HOA title. You need to stop talking, take your fine, and go home. Karen sank back into the chair like her legs couldn't hold the weight of her own ego. Jake turned to Marquez. Is the pilot okay? She nodded. Stable. He's at the county hospital. Said he saw an open field, angled down, and prayed. If he'd hit a rooftop or power line, he wouldn't have made it. Jake exhaled slowly. Glad he found my field. Then, Marquez gave him a rare smile. You probably saved his life, whether you realize it or not. Across the field, Karen let out a dramatic sigh. This is so unfair. Oh, it's very fair, Jake muttered, as the FAA team finished their perimeter mapping. Karen tried one last move. She dug into her bag and pulled out a paper-marked HOA violation notice, filled out, signed by her, and clearly pre-printed. She stormed up to Jake, holding it out like it was a sacred scroll. I'm citing you for unapproved land use under Article 6. Section 9 of the Neighborhood Agreement. You'll be receiving a fine for the damages caused by this aviation incident. Jake stared at it, then burst out laughing. Karen, you are the one who trespassed. You interfered with federal investigators. You got fined by the and you're standing on my land without permission, again. You really want to double down right now? I'm not afraid of you, she snapped. No, Jake said. But you should be afraid of the paperwork I'm filing after this. For trespassing, for harassment, and for attempted defamation. Karen's eyes twitched. Have a nice walk home, he said, turning his back on her as she stormed off, her heels catching in the mud. Jake finally allowed himself a small, satisfied smile, because this time, It wasn't just his word against hers. This time, the feds had receipts. 3 days had passed since the crash, and Jake Walker's quiet ranch life had been anything but quiet. Reporters had shown up. First one, then 3 more. News vans lined the edge of the gravel road. Drones buzzed overhead, legally, this time capturing Bureau footage of the west field where the single-engine plane had gone down. Even local talk radio had dubbed Jake the rancher who saved a pilot, though he swore all he did was not panic and point the right direction to the ambulance. The real story, though, was still developing, and Jake was about to hear it straight from the source. He stood near the crash site, now mostly cleared. The FAA had removed the wreckage, tagged the area, and packed up their mobile units. The grass was scorched, the ground torn, but it would heal. Just like the man who had fallen from the sky. A county vehicle rolled up the dirt path. A nurse stepped out, followed by a bandaged man walking slowly, with a cane in one hand and gratitude in his eyes. "You must be Jake," the man said. "That's me," Jake replied, walking forward. "You must be the guy who nearly took out my tractor shed." They both chuckled and shook hands. "Name's Aaron Briggs," the man said, "pilot for a small regional service. I was transporting a single passenger when the engine seized midair, lost all power. Radio died right after. All I could see were rooftops, telephone wires, and then your open field." Jake nodded slowly. "Heard you barely cleared the ridge." Aaron smirked. "If I'd been 50 feet lower, we wouldn't be having this conversation." Jake looked out over the field. "I'm glad you made it." Aaron's eyes misted slightly. "I owe you, man. Most people would have panicked, or stood back filming. You ran straight in, called for help, checked on me. That kind of calm saves lives." Jake shrugged. "I just did what anyone decent would have done." Aaron grinned. "I've flown over a lot of places. Trust me, decency ain't standard issue these days." As they talked, a familiar voice floated through the air. "Oh, great. You're rewarding him now." Jake turned slowly, his jaw tightening. Karen Grayson, dressed in an oversized sun hat, arms folded, stood just beyond the fence line. This time, she didn't dare step foot onto Jake's property. Not after receiving her official cease and desist order via certified mail the day before. And definitely not after being slapped with an FAA fine that had gone viral on local news. Karen's tantrum had become a meme. Her flailing arms and "I'm the HOA president" rant had made it to TikTok, Instagram, and even a few late-night comedy reels. The public wasn't laughing with her. Aaron glanced at her, then at Jake. "That the screamer?" "Oh yeah," Jake muttered. Karen glared. "You manipulated the whole situation. You invited that crash so you could paint yourself as some local hero and make the HOA look bad." Jake blinked. "Did you just say I invited a plane crash? I knew something was off about you. You've been defying the HOA for years." Aaron stepped up beside Jake. "Lady, you think this man planned a mechanical failure and bet his life on a plane hitting a field just right? You're dumber than the goose that almost broke my windshield." Karen's face turned red. "This isn't over. The HOA board will know. It is over." Jake cut in, stepping closer to the fence. "See, Karen, I spoke to a few people. After all this, the FAA, the sheriff, even some of your own board members, and it turns out they're tired of your antics. Tired of the fake citations, the harassment, the drama. You weren't protecting anyone. You were tripping, and now everyone sees it." Karen opened her mouth, but Jake kept going. "The FAA cleared me of any wrongdoing. They even thanked me. You're the one who broke multiple laws. You're the one who turned an emergency into a sideshow. And now, the whole county knows it." Just then, Jake's phone buzzed. It was a message from a neighbor. "Dude, you're in the paper again. Front page. HOA prez, fined after harassing ranch." Hero. Jake looked up and gave Karen a polite smile. You have a nice day now? Karen huffed, turned sharply, and stomped off down the road, heels digging into gravel like a spoiled celebrity denied backstage access. Aaron exhaled and shook his head. She like this every week. Jake laughed. Pretty much. But I've got a feeling her reign is about to crash harder than that plane. Later that afternoon, Jake was invited to speak briefly at the town council meeting. It wasn't something he liked doing. He hated the spotlight, but he showed up in boots, flannel, and a 5-minute story that ended with one simple sentence. I didn't do anything special. I just helped. And that shouldn't be rare enough to make headlines. The room applauded. Karen, meanwhile, didn't attend. Rumor had it she was meeting with HOA board members, who were, according to 2 anonymous sources, discussing a vote to remove her from her position. Jake didn't care much for gossip, but he did care when, 2 days later, he got a letter. It was from the FAA, a formal commendation, thanking him for his cooperation during a sensitive investigation, and for his swift, responsible actions that likely saved a life. Jake folded the letter and pinned it to his workshop wall, right next to a cracked horseshoe and a faded photo of his grandfather holding the ranch's first deed. Sometimes, the truth has to crash down loud enough for the world to notice, and sometimes, it lands in just the right place. By the time the mailman dropped off the letter, Jake had already heard the rumors. Karen was suing. Of course she was. After being fined by the FAA, publicly humiliated on local news, and silently benched by her own HOA board, it was only a matter of time before she pulled out her favorite weapon, paperwork. And this one was wild. The letter came certified, on expensive-looking legal stationery. Inside was a full lawsuit filed by Karen Grayson against Jake Walker, alleging emotional distress, reputational damage, and loss of HOA credibility due to hostile interference and unauthorized aerial activities. Jake read it twice, then once more just for laughs. Then he calmly picked up his phone and called his lawyer, Sam Torres, a friend of the family, and a man who'd once described Karen as the reason aspirin exists. Sam was already laughing before Jake finished reading the first paragraph. She's suing you for being the victim of a plane crash. Yep, buddy, this is the most HOA thing I've ever heard. Jake wasn't worried. Not really. But something about the fact that Karen still thought she could twist this into a victory, after all the warnings, all the fines, and all the footage, well, that made it personal, and this time, Jake wasn't playing defense. He was going on the offensive. 2 weeks later, they were in court. A small claims hearing, packed tighter than a high school basketball game. Curious neighbors filled the benches. Karen strutted in with a new clipboard, a stack of printouts, and a smug grin that looked just a little too rehearsed. Jake walked in with his lawyer, a simple black binder, and the calm confidence of a man who had facts on his side. The judge, a silver-haired woman with no tolerance for drama, got straight to the point. Ms. Grayson, you're suing Mr. Walker for emotional distress and reputational harm. Is that correct? Karen stood. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Walker deliberately allowed an aircraft to crash on his land to make me look irresponsible and dangerous. As a result, I have suffered public mockery, online harassment, and damage to my standing as HOA president. The judge blinked. You're claiming he caused the plane crash? Karen hesitated. Well, he enabled it. He didn't stop it. And then he used the incident to target me, turning neighbors against me. Sam leaned over and whispered to Jake, she's digging her own grave. The judge turned to Jake. Mr. Walker, your response? Jake stood, calm, direct. Your Honor, the crash was declared a mechanical emergency by FAA investigators. I called 911 immediately, assisted the injured pilot, and cooperated fully with authorities. Ms. Grayson, on the other hand, trespassed on my land, interfered with federal agents, and was fined over $3,000 for doing so. This suit isn't about damage, it's retaliation. Sam stood next and handed over a file. We're filing a counterclaim, Your Honor, for trespassing, harassment, defamation, and abuse of legal process. Included are cease and desist notices, HOA, meeting transcripts, and video evidence of Ms. Grayson violating federal crash site protocols. The judge flipped through the binder. Then she looked at Karen. You approached a federal crash site against direct orders. Karen sniffed. I was investigating a community violation. I have rights. The judge closed the file. Ms. Grayson, I'm dismissing your claim with prejudice. It has no legal merit, and frankly, it borders on delusional. Karen gasped, but the judge wasn't done. As for the counterclaim, I find in favor of Mr. Walker, Ms. Grayson. You are ordered to pay damages of $5,000 for trespassing and defamation. Additionally, I'm referring this case to the HOA Oversight Board for review of your conduct. Karen sat down like the air had been sucked out of her. The room was silent until someone in the back chuckled, then another, and suddenly the entire crowd was quietly grinning. Justice had landed. Hard the fallout came fast. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. 3 days later, Jake got the news in a group email. Karen Grayson had been removed as HOA president. By unanimous vote, she was barred from holding any official position for the next 5 years. Neighbors began reaching out, people who'd once stayed silent out of fear. Jake got thank you pies, fence repair offers, even a gift basket from a neighbor he barely knew. One note stood out. Thanks for standing up to the tyrant. Our neighborhood finally feels like ours again. A month later, Jake was back in the pasture. No cameras, no sirens, just the wind rustling through the trees. He paused by the scorched patch of grass where the plane had once landed. The marks were fading. The land was healing. Just like everything else. He smiled, because sometimes justice doesn't roar in like thunder. Sometimes it crashes out of the sky, takes the petty with it, and leaves the truth standing strong.